It was a crisp Saturday afternoon in a small, predominantly white suburban town. A group of teenagers, led by Brad, a cocky high school junior, roamed the local park with nothing but mischief on their minds. Brad, known for his arrogance and quick temper, had gathered his usual crew, Tom, Jake, and Casey, who followed his every command. They weren't looking for trouble exactly, but the moment they spotted the old man sitting alone on a park bench, something stirred in them. The man, visibly black with deep lines etched into his face, was enjoying a quiet moment, feeding pigeons while the sun cast golden rays across the park. He had a serene look about him, his old weathered hands moving gently as he tossed breadcrumbs to the birds. His age was evident, his back slightly hunched and his pace slow and measured. Brad's eyes narrowed as he saw the man. "Hey guys, check out the old man," he sneered, nudging his friends. "Bet he doesn't belong here." His voice dripped with mockery, and the others chuckled, feeding off Brad's confidence. "Yeah," Tom added, "probably wandered off from wherever they keep his kind." They approached the old man slowly, smirks plastered on their faces. The old man didn't notice them at first. His focus remained on the pigeons fluttering around his feet. But as their shadows grew over him, he finally looked up, his calm brown eyes meeting Brad's sneer. "Afternoon, boys," the old man said kindly, his voice soft but clear. Brad scoffed. "Afternoon? What are you, some kind of museum relic? Shouldn't you be somewhere else?" The old man raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He could see where this was going. He had dealt with people like Brad before, too young to understand the world and too arrogant to know how little they knew. Tom chimed in, "What are you doing here anyway?" "This park ain't for people like you." The old man sighed, brushing crumbs off his lap. "I'm just enjoying the day like anyone else," he replied evenly, still not rising to their bait. His voice remained calm, steady, and peaceful, which only seemed to irritate the teens more. Brad stepped closer, now looming over the old man. "People like you? You think you belong in this neighborhood? This isn't your place, old man." The old man looked at Brad, his eyes locking onto the teens, and for a moment, something passed between them. A flicker of understanding perhaps, or maybe just recognition of something deeper, but Brad quickly shrugged it off, determined to show off for his friends. "I think it's time for you to leave," Brad spat, pushing the old man's shoulder. The man barely moved, his body as firm as a rock despite his age. The teenagers laughed, though their laughter carried an edge of nervousness. Something about the old man's calmness unnerved them. Brad pushed him again, harder this time, but the old man merely stood up, his full height suddenly more imposing than they had expected. "You boys should go home," the old man said softly, his voice still gentle but with a quiet authority that made even Brad pause. "There's nothing good for you here." Brad's face reddened with anger. How dare this old man talk down to him, in front of his friends no less? He clenched his fists. "You don't tell me what to do, old man." And with that, Brad threw a punch, aiming squarely for the old man's face. But in an instant, faster than the teens could comprehend, the old man shifted, his body moving with a fluid grace that defied his age. He caught Brad's fist in midair, his grip firm but controlled. Brad's eyes widened in shock. The old man released Brad's hand, gently pushing him back. "You don't want to do that, son," he said quietly, his gaze steady. "Violence will only bring you pain." Tom and Jake rushed forward, fists raised, but the old man moved like water. He dodged their attacks effortlessly, his body bending and twisting in ways that made the teenagers stumble over themselves. With a few swift movements, he had disarmed them both, using only their momentum against them, and sent them sprawling to the ground. Brad, now furious and humiliated, lunged again, but the old man sidestepped easily, sweeping Brad's legs out from under him. Brad hit the ground hard, gasping for breath as his friends scrambled to their feet, bewildered by what had just happened. Casey, the quietest of the group, stood frozen, watching in awe as the old man straightened his back and looked down at them, still calm, still composed. "You boys need to learn respect," the old man said, his voice now firm but not unkind. "Not just for people who look like me, but for everyone. You don't know the battles people have fought, the lives they've lived." The teenagers sat in stunned silence, too shocked to respond. The old man took a deep breath and turned to leave, But before he walked away, he paused and looked back at them. "I've lived many years," he said softly. "I've faced people much stronger than you, and I've learned one thing. Hate will destroy you from the inside, not the person you aim it at. You still have time to change." With that, he walked away, his steps slow and steady, leaving the teens sitting in the dirt, their minds racing. They had expected to humiliate an old man, but instead they had been taught a lesson they would never forget. As the old man disappeared down the path, Brad's face was still red, not just from the physical embarrassment, but from something deeper: shame. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his actions had consequences, and that respect was earned, not taken by force. For weeks after, Brad and his friends couldn't shake the memory of the old man. They returned to the park, hoping to see him again, but he never returned. It wasn't until much later that they learned from one of the local shopkeepers that the old man had once been a karate master, a champion who had traveled the world, teaching discipline and respect to thousands of students. The shopkeeper smiled knowingly. "He's a legend, that one. But he doesn't fight for sport anymore. Now he only fights to teach." Brad, Tom, Jake, and Casey walked away from the shop in silence, each of them deep in thought. They had gone looking for trouble that day, but instead found wisdom in the most unexpected place: a quiet, old black man who had mastered not just karate, but the art of living. Brad and his friends couldn't shake the old man's words, especially Brad. They stopped going to the park for a while, afraid they might run into him again. Not because of the physical humiliation, but because the encounter had stirred something deeper in them, a sense of guilt they didn't know how to handle. A month passed and life moved on. But Brad wasn't the same. He found himself replaying that day over and over, remembering the old man's calm demeanor and the quiet strength in his words. He thought about the hate he carried, the racist jokes he laughed at, and how easy it was to follow the crowd. But after that day, everything felt different. One Friday afternoon, Brad found himself walking through the town square, his mind drifting back to that day. He noticed a group of younger kids from the neighborhood, some of them white, others black, playing basketball together at the local court. A few months ago, Brad would have sneered at the sight, maybe even joined his friends in making racist comments. But now, all he could think about was the old man's words: "You still have time to change." Brad stopped to watch the kids for a while. They played hard, laughing and joking, completely unaware of the invisible lines society had drawn around them. And for the first time, Brad didn't feel the usual sting of resentment when he saw them together. Without realizing it, he walked over to the bench near the court and sat down, his mind a swirl of emotions. After a while, he noticed someone sitting next to him. He turned his head and felt his heart skip a beat. It was the old man. The old man didn't say anything at first, just nodded in acknowledgement, his eyes focused on the kids playing. Brad's mouth went dry, but he forced himself to speak. "Sir?" Brad started, his voice shaky. I'm sorry about what happened in the park." The old man didn't react immediately. He kept his gaze on the basketball court, watching the children run back and forth, the ball bouncing with rhythmic thuds. Finally, he spoke, his voice as calm as ever. "You don't owe me an apology, son," he said. "The apology is for yourself." Brad frowned, not understanding. "For myself?" The old man turned to him, eyes calm yet intense. "Hate is heavy, son. It consumes you, not those you direct it at. Letting go is harder, but it's the only way to free yourself." Brad, feeling smaller than ever, asked quietly, "How do I stop hating?" The old man smiled gently. "See people for who they are, not their skin. We all struggle, bleed, and laugh the same way. Respect comes from recognizing that." Brad nodded, understanding at last. The old man stood up, his body frail but his spirit unbroken. "It's never too late to change, Brad." Stunned that the old man knew his name, Brad watched him walk away, feeling a deep sense of peace and clarity. The weight in his chest began to lift, and for the first time he didn't feel the need to hate. He promised himself to change, knowing it wouldn't be easy but feeling ready for the journey. And with that, Brad took his first step toward becoming a better person.